everyone. My name is Kendra Seymour, and I want to welcome you back to another Change the Air mini class on testing options for your home. It can be hard to know where to put your time, trust, and money when it comes to testing, which is why we've developed this mini class series so you can get the most important information on a specific test in an easy to understand way. Now, so far we've discussed air testing, surface sampling, ERMI testing, and today we're going to be talking about the EPA 36. Now, if you're new to our mini class, you can expect each class to cover the strengths and limitations of the testing method because there are no perfect tests, how to perform the test, and how to read the results, and more. So finally, if you haven't gone to our website, changetheairfoundation.org, be sure to head on over and sign up for our newsletter because it really is the best way to get interviews like this, helpful information, tidbits directly to your inbox. Plus, when we finish filming this series, we're going to be sending out a testing cheat sheet guide that's absolutely gold, and it's going out exclusively to those on our newsletter. That said, I want to give a warm welcome back to Mark Levy, who's done an amazing job of taking us through our previous mini classes. And we are just so excited that you're here, Mark.
Well, thank you so much. Let me get set up here if I can.
Absolutely.
And let me just bear with me for a second as I share the screen. As we know, just takes a moment here. Can you see the screen now?
I can. And then go ahead and...
And I'm going to... How's that?
Perfect.
So we're good to go. So first off, I want to say, I got to change this to the beginning. So I apologize for that. So
Perfect.
I'm sorry. So at any rate, it should have been lined up at the beginning, but it wasn't. So let me just say welcome to Testing 101. And this is for EPA 36 MSQ-PCR testing. And let me talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the DNA-based MSQ-PCR testing. What does the EPA 36 test? What does it really do? When do we use the EPA 36? Where to collect? The strengths, the limitations, and then reading a EPA 36 report is what we're going to be talking about a little bit later on as well. So what is this EPA 36? It's actually an MSQ-PCR acronym for mold-specific quantitative polymerase chain reaction. What that means is that it's a DNA-based type of formatting, which is the most accurate form for detection and identification for the various types of molds and species of molds. And that's really critically important when you're dealing with sampling, because when you want to know what's going on in your environment, it's important to know that you have mold, but it's even more critically important to know the species. And this is a really good go-to type of sampling method for that to be utilized for. It also enables us to identify at concentration levels, and we'll talk a little bit about spore equivalence and what that means from a dominant perspective. And the EPA 36, it's going to be very much like what you're seeing with ERMI. So there's an ERMI likeness to it because it is an MSQ PCR, and the way that it is recorded is very similar as well. So what does the EPA 36 test? Well, it tests for a panel of 36 molds that are actually broken up into two groups. Group one being water damage molds and their species. There's 26 of those. And then group two being more common molds, 10 of those that are actually found on the outdoors. Now, what I love about the EPA 36 is that it's a tool to use to be able to test for specific areas. So in other words, if you have certain areas where you're concerned about, maybe contents, we'll get into that a little bit more later. Those are things that you can test for, and it can help you really understand not only the mold, but also the species that's there. So how can you do that? Well, you can use a swab or you can use a dust cassette. And I have a little bit of an illustration that I want to just kind of walk you through here, and it'll tell you a little bit more about it.
EPA 36 sampling methodology is a very good way to sample areas that are very specific, and you want to be targeted and be able to identify certain types of molds and species of molds that are there. For example, inside ventilation systems, mattresses, couches, rugs, and even coffee makers. So one of the things that we would use would be a swab, and this would be good for hard surfaces, where you would actually collect on a specific targeted area that you really want to be able to identify. The other sampling method would be used via cassette. And this cassette actually attaches to a hose of your vacuum. And then inside the cassette, you have a mesh-like filter, and that mesh-like filter is where the dust gets collected. And when you attach it to the vacuum, you're then going to vacuum over, if it's the couch or a mattress or the rug, so that you can collect the dust. These are two different ways that you can actually collect utilizing EPA 36 and being able to speciate for the different types of molds that are there. I hope this has been helpful.
So as I mentioned, the EPA 36, very similar to the ERMI in terms of the nature of the DNA formatting, but it doesn't give you an ERMI score. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So when is it the best time to use this EPA 36? Well, I really think that this is a really key type of tool to use for specific areas or items that you want to test for and really test to the species level. So there could be examples where you may have water damage that doesn't look like there's mold that's there, or maybe certain types of unusual substance that looks like it's dust and it doesn't even look like it might even be mold. Or you may have certain items that are contents that you want to be able to test for. These are things that you want to be able to target and have specific results in terms of the impact of those particular areas. If you have health-related issues, it's always a good idea to understand exactly where the mold is and where it's coming from. So this helps validate the presence of mold, the location in terms of that source area that's being there, and also what you're being exposed to. So knowing that you have indicator molds for water damage is really a critically important thing, as we talked about before, because it's the species that really determines that opportunistic nature. Now, another great way to use this is through post-verification testing. A lot of times when you're doing the substrate cleaning, you want to be able to understand how well it's been cleaned, or maybe even if you have certain types of content in the home where you want to be able to test the efficacy of that cleaning, this could be a great way and a tool to be able to determine the efficacy of the cleaning. And for legal cases, another great tool as well, because it gives you not just the fact that you have mold, but it speciates for you. And that speciation now tells you a bigger story, and it gives you a bigger picture of what the impact of that environment happens to have. So where do you collect it? As I said earlier, the collection is one where it's going to be very specific. I think these are great examples and great tools, I should say great areas for you to be able to test locations on. For example, your ventilation system, a mattress, a couch, or even rugs. You can use the cassette that we talked about and attach that to your vacuum, and that can really show the impact of what's going on with one of those particular items. Whether you have water damage on a wall or a ceiling, maybe wood framing in an attic or crawl space, those are really good areas to be able to determine if there are molds that are actually originating from various types of areas. And if you're doing a cup of joe every morning, I'd be really careful, because coffee makers are notorious for mold growth. And one of the things that happens is that because you have the moisture, you have the coffee grinds and so forth, they become food source. And we really don't know the type of toxins that we're putting in our body when we drink a cup of coffee. By doing the EPA 36, it really gives you an eye opener in terms of the different types of mold species and what their capabilities are, to give you an understanding if you may be drinking toxic coffee every morning. So what are the strengths? The fact that it's a DNA formatting, it provides the most sensitive form for detection and identification of the different types of molds and species of molds. I've said this over and over again. It's really the species that's so important, because it does determine the opportunistic nature of what's going on. So being able to identify that off of certain types of areas is going to be very much of a benefit for you. You can expedite for a quick turnaround time. And the DNA formatting, it takes away the concern of overloading a sample due to, for example, you have dominant molds that can actually grow and they can overshadow certain types of molds that are there. It actually could also have certain type of debris, heavy dust that could overshadow the results. All that's taken away because of the DNA formatting that it actually goes through. And it helps you identify source areas of mold contamination. And this is important because when you're identifying certain molds in your home and you want to know where they're coming from, this is going to be a tool that you can use that helps you really be more specific to where those areas of contamination may be. And we already talked about the remediation side. It's a great tool to use to really test the efficacy of how well it's been cleaned in terms of substrates or even the certain types of contents that you may have been really attempting to clean as well. There are some limitations. Those limitations, number one, it is more expensive. Also, you have to be careful with prohibitors such as drywall dust, rust, chemicals. All those can actually corrupt the sample and invalidate the results and make it something that not being able to use. So what do you look for now when you get the report itself? As you can see here, this report, very similar to an ERMI report. You can see that it has two different types of groupings. There's group one that we have over here that has 26 different types of water damaged molds. And there's also group two that has 10 of the more common molds from the outdoors. But what's interesting is that this does not have an ERMI score. And that's really not what we want to look for. What we do want to look for is really the different types of molds and species of molds that are there, because that's what's going to be much more telling for you. So in this particular example, you can see here Aspergillus fumigatus, and look at the concentration levels of the spore equivalents. So this is really showing you how dominant that particular mold happens to be off the area that we ended up sampling. And the same thing holds true with the Aspergillus niger. The Aspergillus niger has a higher type of spore equivalent that's there as well. But when I go down the list, you could see that there's other types of molds that are there that could be very concerning that you may not have picked up in terms of a microscopy. For example, you could see here Cotonium, where even though the Cotonium is at a low level of 87, you could see right here that that could be overshadowed. The same thing with Stachybotrys. So what we're showing here is that even though you have certain molds that are dominant molds, it's not overshadowing other types of serious types of molds that are in the environment. And we all know Stachybotrys, it's considered to be the black toxic mold. Cotonium is also a high water content mold that can produce mycotoxins. So at the end of the day, you're able to see there are a number of different molds that are here that can actually produce mycotoxins that could actually impact that environment. So when you're looking at this report, the key thing that you really want to really pay close attention to is what types of molds and species of molds am I actually detecting? What are the capabilities of those particular types of species? Do they have the ability to produce mycotoxins? And are those types of molds and species of molds having anything to do what could be going on with me from a health perspective? Because a lot of us have what I call clinicals that they basically go through to detect mycotoxins within your system. Some people can even detect certain types of molds and species of molds. You could take this report, you can sit down with your doctor, you can actually really review this in a way to see if it has any kind of correlation to what's going on within your home. This is really a key area of a tool that I think is one that is going to be extremely beneficial for people to use. Again, it has the 26 water damage molds that you can identify. It has the more common molds that you would be picking up from the outdoors. And, you know, one thing I will mention when it comes to your group two, if there's a higher level of spore equivalence, that's indicative that the mold that you're picking up is coming from within the home as opposed to coming from outside the home itself. So this is a tool that is one particular sampling method in your toolbox. And it's one that I would highly recommend that you consider to use, especially if you really want to be able to identify certain specific areas of where mold could be harboring or what you may see. And when it comes to actually content, I think it's a great tool to use to really determine if your content or contents have been actually impacted as well. Hopefully this has been helpful, and with that in mind, I'll see if you have any questions for me.
That was great, Mark. Thank you so much. I love that this is another tool that people can have in their toolbox because, testing is just one piece of the puzzle, but I love that, it can serve in particular this case, so targeted and can give you some pretty specific information that I think can be really helpful for people.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much again. And for anyone listening, if you haven't, head on over to changetheairfoundation.org. We have other mini classes where we talk about ERMI and air testing and more. So you'll want to check those out. And if you're watching on Facebook or Instagram, be sure to like, follow, and share us. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.